Welcome to Front Range Facts. This is Anthony Meisner.
And this is Jim Merrion.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We are here to bring you the housing market update for March of 2021.
Yeah, let's get right started with it, Anthony. Wanted to talk a little bit about some national real estate news first. National Association of Realtors, NAR as we call it, reported the median sale price of an existing single-family home in March 2021, which is last month, reached a high of $329,000, which represents a year-over-year increase of a little over 17%. The biggest jump pretty much on all of historical data, with that. And Redfin also is reporting that the average list to sale or sale to list price ratio is 101%. So that means the average home across the country is seeing 101% of what they're asking for in that offer price. And that's an all-time high for their data. And 46% of homes, according to their report, are getting under contract within 7 days. And I want to say it's something close to like 60% of all homes are getting under contract within 2 weeks in the markets that they serve. So pretty sizable gain, with everything there. Now, the other thing that Freddie Mac wanted to mention is that, I think it touches upon the idea of what we get asked all the time is there a bubble? What is going on with this market? How come it's so crazy? And, is it about to pop? Am I a sucker for getting in on it now? But the fact is, there's a 3.8 million single family home deficit, that was projected by Freddie Mac at the end of 2020 based upon, just various population and demand aspects. So we're at such a huge housing deficit. And, even if like every single home went on the market tomorrow that was in forbearance, it still would only address about half of that need. So it's a huge gap right now. And another thing that was really showing kind of where the tailwind is in all this is Zillow thinks that there's going to be 6.4 million homes sold in 2021, which, is up 13.5% from 2020. And it's going to be the single strongest year in sales since 2006, according to their data. And they do expect home values to rise 10.4% over the next 12 months. So the price gains we're seeing now, they expect to essentially continue throughout the year. And then, Freddie Mac, also, which they thought there was a huge housing deficit. They're even more optimistic than Zillow with housing data. And they think that there's going to be 7.1 million homes sold in 2021 and then 6.7 million in 2022. Anthony, I kind of remember like in 2018, we were talking 5 million homes or so sold for that year. So this is a significant increase over some of those, earlier years. And I think we've dipped as low as like 4.5 million in sales, a few years back. So we're looking at a massive leap. And the biggest problem is where are these homes coming from? Because everybody's nationwide is suffering from a deficit of inventory.
Yeah, and the craziest thing to me is we work in a Colorado market, right? And the Colorado market is night and day more extreme than national, right? We're seeing these numbers come out of the national market. Wait till we get to the Colorado and the local data for the counties here. It's just out of control.
So the Mortgage Bankers Association, essentially the trade group for the lenders, stated that purchase originations are on track to grow 16.4% to a new record of $1.67 trillion in 2021. And so, their total originations, including like refis, is about $4 trillion. So, but, they're seeing a huge chunk of just, single family home purchase originations and townhome and condo originations for this year. So, 16.5% increase basically. And Fannie Mae is estimating that the GDP for our country is going to be 6.8% this year, which is just another indicator that, everybody is just waiting for COVID to be over. Everybody's itching to pull the trigger. I think GDP for the first quarter is something like, 9 or 10%, very high amount just for the first quarter of this year. So it's really going to be gangbusters. And there's just going to be a lot of enthusiasm, I think, driving every part of the economy up higher. But, in housing specifically, there's some very big structural issues that are not going to be addressed because the inventory is so bad and demand is so high. So, a couple other things that I thought was interesting was about the millennials, because, there's such a large population cohort, and 4.8 million millennials are turning 30 in 2021. And, essentially, millennials have had a delayed purchase, getting into the home buyers market, beating every other generation. They've held off the longest. They're kind of considered the renter generation. But, all the data really seems to point to, a millennial who's between the ages of 30 to 34, that's kind of their peak home buying years. And so to have almost 5 million of them enter, that 30-year-old bracket this year shows that there's just a huge influx of demand that's, going to continue to drive this market forward. And 43% of first-time millennial home buyers have been looking for a home for more than a year. So there's a lot of home buyers that are ready to pull the trigger and do something. And then you add to it the 4.8 million who are just turning 30 now, who are probably really starting to seriously consider doing that kind of thing. Very strong demand and a long tail towards it.
43% is an incredible number. The fact that the pent-up demand is half of the millennial generation by the end of this year, with 4 million extra people coming on, we have a really, really amazing housing market coming for the next few years, for sure.
Yeah, and I started to dig into some data because I was really curious as to where our home building is essentially at too, because one answer to a millennial buying a home is new construction, and I started to realize that we've got a massive deficit we've been having in home building. The home builders got really trigger shy after 2008 and stopped building homes. Turn that fountain off. And so I started to look in the historical data as to what we averaged per year for new homes. And this graph that we're showing now is essentially, it's shocking to me, because back in the 1970s.
Astounding. Look at the 70s, 400,000 homes per year. That's what that's saying?
414,000 to be technical. Yeah, 414,000 every year, starting in, because according to the Bureau of Census, as you see that asterisk, they basically had different reporting data before then. So starting in 76 to 79, 414,000 homes were built on average. 1980s, it dropped by about 100,000 to about 315,000 homes. And then in the 90s, you were at about 200-ish thousand homes. And then in the 90s, it was 150,000 on average. And then it's 55,000 in the 2010s. And so that's nuts. And when you think about, I put that little blurb at the bottom of this thing just to show that there are 2.3 million first-time home buyers that purchased homes in 2020, and there are 55,000 new construction homes built for those people. This is
the entire country.
This is stupid. There's something wrong here.
Well, what this tells me more than anything is it just tells me the labor shortage we're experiencing in this country has just become worse and worse and worse every year since the 70s. Now, we know a lot of other factors play into that, like, building costs and water and all kinds of other crazy things. But the reality is that there's been a fundamental shift in our economy to more college educations, more white collar jobs, and people don't want to do as much building, or at least we're not encouraging our young people to get into the construction world. And I think that's a huge part of what's creating this problem.
Well, but also think about it this way. It's like if like our population was flat or whatever else, this would be a natural progression in a mature country where,
Sure.
You start building a lot of homes, and then once they're built, you resale them and all that stuff. People die, people move on, blah, blah, blah. But we have not been sitting still with our population. And, we're at like 340 million or so right now. And back in the 70s, it was probably half of that amount, roughly or so. So there's a complete inversion here as to what should be happening compared to what, is happening for sure.
Absolutely. Let's look at this, the top 10 states where millennials are moving. How do you feel about Colorado in this one, Jim?
Well, what I found fascinating about this, and the reason I'm including this is because when you look at all the data, of where people are moving, Colorado is not the top 5. It's I think number 8, number 12, somewhere, depending on who counts it and when. We've fallen at 8 to 12, 15 kind of time with, a number of people wanting to move to Colorado. But what's really fascinating, I think, about looking at it from this perspective is if, roughly 45% of all, all home sales are to new home buyers, and millennials make up the bulk of that. So let's look at the millennials here, and holy God, we've got 30,000. We're the second biggest, bucket list state, in the country, essentially, for millennials. So while the nation might be moving to the Sunbelt states, I guess that's the older people, that are doing it. The people that, are basically looking for a retirement kind of strategy, an exit strategy, whereas Colorado is viewed as that foundational kind of state where we're going to start, family. I'm going to get married here, start a family and live here because it's a lifestyle choice. So very fascinating to kind of look at it just from the millennial perspective.
The most fascinating thing to me on this entire slide is that Arizona and Florida, two places you'd think people go to retire, are like two of the highest places for millennials to move to. That has to just be due to the amount of jobs that are possible, the amount of maybe it's being closer to home. I don't know. Like maybe their parents retired out in Arizona. But it is an interesting fact because those are not two places you would think that the millennials are hot to trot. Like Texas and Colorado, absolutely. You'd think Washington, of course, right? There's a lot going on in a lot of these places. These are thriving, booming tech cities in many cases, but it is fascinating. I always like to see this data. I actually threw this one in here from Showing Time. It's a little different than what we normally show, but this was really to kind of highlight the Western region. Normally we put in one that shows all the different regions and how they're doing, but the one thing that we've kind of talked about over the last, couple of years we've been doing this, everything's kind of trending in the same direction across the country. The Western region's usually a little more extreme, and we're getting, a little bit more showing traffic than anywhere else in the country. You can kind of see the national average. We're at 311 versus 271. But the reason I put this in here is it has some historical data, and it really goes to show that we bounce around that 100 to 150 mark every year, right? You can really see the seasonality that kind of takes place in there. And we are over double that right now. I mean, just the amount of showings that are taking place per active listing, driving those indexes through the roof. This is a really, really interesting time. This is another one that really says why we're not in a bubble right now in the real estate world. It really just goes to show that demand is at an all-time high, and there's just not enough homes for people to buy. So those showing indexes are at record pace.
Certainly.
Well, I am Anthony Meisner from Land Title, and you can reach out to me anytime at my cell phone, 303-968-9868, and ameisner@ltgc.com.
And I'm Jim Merrion, Realtor here at Coldwell Banker in Colorado. My phone number is 303-548-0243, and you can always shoot me an email to jim@ourcoloradohomes.com, or feel free to send an email to Anthony and I at frontrangefacts@gmail.com. Happy to share with you the slides that kind of fed this data, share a slide deck with you guys if you want to reach out and contact us.
Don't forget, every time, this is not the end of our podcast. This is just the national section. We wanted to get right into the numbers. We're going into Colorado and local data coming up next. And you can always get us on our other podcast at Get Real with Blockchain if you're interested in the blockchain real estate space. Perfect. All right, let's go over to the showing time index that really shows where we are based off of last year and the previous year. And I really like this one, Jim. I mean, you had a little bit to do with why we ended up actually getting this data, right?
I'm not going to take full credit for Anthony, but the rumor is that it was my idea that built this. Yes, but we'll see. But I never know. I think this is it is a good way to just let the audience know that caveat big here is that from this point forward, essentially every comparison of year over year should be taken with a grain of salt, and this illustrates it better than anything else as to why you need to somewhat question just the things you read when they talk about how much business is up in 2021 versus 2020 because we had this massive drop in just showing activity. There's still a ton of demand considering the fact we couldn't even get in and see homes in person. I was able to get listings under contract sight unseen, but the fact is that did have an impact, and it's going to continue to muddy the waters with year-over-year data. But that's why this is also good, because it brings in that 2019 as kind of a baseline metric, very kind of standard year with a lot of that data, and comparing it to where 2021 is. Obviously, it's better than 2020, but we are, as you can see on these orange, the orange line, which is 2021. There's quite a bit of a substantial increase over 2019 activity in a lot of these, valleys and hills on all of this. So very strong 2021. And again, very kind of puzzling that one drop that happened between February and March, as well, because it didn't seem to correlate with any particular, information.
Absolutely. I think a lot of this has to do with weather. A lot of it has to do with just how many listings are actually coming on the market during that week. There's a lot of things that are variables when you have like the supply line that's this big and this demand line that's as big as they can come. So the volatility here is actually pretty fascinating that we'll probably never see when we get closer and closer to normalized markets. All right, so let's get over to the townhouse and condo data for the entire state of Colorado. Sold listings are up 25% statewide, which is pretty incredible if you look at it this year versus last year. If you look at it year to date, see those month over month numbers, like Jim said, we really have to take those with a grain of salt. We know that we couldn't even show a house last year at this time. So when you take a look at that, it really changes kind of what we're looking at and how we're looking at that information. So, but we are actually year to date up about 17% in total sold listings in the townhouse condo market. That's incredible. The average sales price is up about 10%, which, you know, Jim and I've been telling you 10 to 20% appreciation over the course of this year, because just with the extreme market conditions we're in, we should see record appreciation. And the days on market are of course shrinking by about 25%, because when you have no houses on the market and you have just a ton of demand, they're moving at as high velocity as we've ever seen them before. And when you go over to the single family home market, it's a little more extreme than the townhouse market, right? We're seeing those average sales prices up 22%.
Yeah, and again, though, that new listing number is just it's brutal. You know, being 10% down.
That is brutal.
Year to date, it's just you know, with all the demand we've got, the pent-up demand, it's a big indicator of the fact that that tailwind we have for prices is going to continue to drive it higher and higher.
Absolutely. Do you think a lot of that has to do with people are a little worried about replacing their current property?
Yeah,
I mean, that's why the majority of new listings are down.
You know, I think there's definitely more people who are moving to different states this year. You know, is higher than the average year, because people are starting to feel they're free to kind of do what they want. And, you know, but at the same time, I mean, I continue to have conversations weekly with people who are definitely shy to get in the market because they just don't feel like either A, they've got a replacement property they could, you know, get into in time, or B, you know, they're psyched about a bidding war on their property, but then they're totally scared about a bidding war that they would have to be in as a buyer. And so they're, you know, thinking, well, maybe I just need to wait, you know, the next couple months out and wait till it cools in the summer, where, you know, I don't really know what the guidance is to that, because it, you know, there just seems to be that, just like COVID kind of, you know, didn't allow a summer slowdown to occur last year. I think there's just so much of this train still moving that even once it slows, it's going to take months to get to the station, you know, so
for sure
it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough, I think, the rest of this year to be a buyer.
I agree. So a lot of people have been asking us over and over and over again just about the question of, are we in a bubble? So even though we'll tell you no over and over and over again, I'm going to keep showing you data that supports what we're talking about. And one of those being the percentage sold price versus list price that people are receiving. And, you know, we talked about that 101% mark that the nation was reaching. You look at single family homes across the entire state of Colorado, we're over 102% list sale price. And if you're currently shopping in any market in this area, it probably feels like about 110%, even though that's not what the data supports, because people are bringing just a wild amount of cash into our marketplaces. You hear all these crazy stories about $400,000 homes selling for $480,000, right? Like the stories are very extreme. And the point we're trying to prove is, even though the percentage list sale price might be very extreme, these numbers have been trending in this direction for a very long time. And we're not on some outlandish amount of information. Like, yes, they're going up, but why are they going up? They're going up because there's no supply. So when there's no supply, we see those average sales prices just skyrocket and go through the roof. So starting about mid-2020 all the way to current, you're really starting to see less seasonality in the marketplace and more of that hockey stick looking appreciation levels that we've been talking about, that 10 to 20% across the marketplaces. So the average sales price in Colorado for, you know, let's call it single family, was up 23% over this time last year, and townhouses are up about 14% over this time last year. So those numbers are just incredible, and it kind of is what it is. This is what we're working with, and this is the environment that Colorado's in. It's very different than the national market, but it is more extreme in every sense of the word.
Absolutely.
I'm Anthony with Lane Title.
Yeah, let's do a shameless self-promotion again of ourselves.
We need those once in a while. I'm Anthony with Land Title. You can always reach me on my cell phone at 303-968-9868.
And I'm Jim Merrion, Realtor here at Coldwell Banker in Colorado. I'm at 303-548-0243, or you can shoot me an email to jim@ourcoloradohomes.com.
Now down to the local markets. Jim, what's going on from our data at the South Metro Denver Association?
So you know, some fancy colors here, and, you know, also, you know, good little graphic. Again, little caveat that just, you know, we are going to see some pretty big jumps over year data. But, you know, this is the South Metro Denver Realtor Association. looking at essentially the wider Denver metro market. Median days in the MLS are down by 2 days, and the weeks of inventory are 4 weeks less of inventory than this time last year. I think the big ones to really look at, the median sale price being 13.3% higher. That's obviously something that, is even more remarkable considering the fact that COVID, was this time last year, and the prices were already very high, when COVID kind of hit. Closed listings are up 10.5%, which I also think is obviously a very strong indicator of the market, considering the inventory is down, essentially the same amount, 10.4%, new listings year over year, and that's pretty crazy too, I think, because there were not a lot of listings on the market last year when COVID hit, and that was kind of a struggle we were having in that market, where there was just not a lot of options for my buyers before COVID happened, and we were already starting to price listings at a fairly strong clip price wise. So it's very indicative of the fact that the supply demand is really askew here.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. If you look into the metro area from the data that we pull, the Entitled through RE Colorado, you're seeing these wild year-over-year changes. So you kind of have to take these with a grain of salt. Like Jim was saying, we show 31% increase in pending numbers. Well, we were shut down halfway through March, right? So when you look at that number, that seems really extreme. But what we do know is if we look at the trending data, as far as the line chart over here, the green number being our supply line, we're at record low inventory levels across all of Greater Metro. We are at the highest possible under contracts and solds for that number. And as supply increases, we will see more under contracts and sold take place, because we are very limited by the amount of supply that's taking place in the market right now. I mean, look at this, less than 1,800 total units on the market at the end of March. We had 5,500 pending number. I mean,
that's what's really, I think, just extremely disturbing. Just look at where 2019 was, the high water mark being over 10,000 homes for sale. That was a kind of market where it started to feel a little bit normal, in some ways there, where people had a little bit more time to breathe before they needed to buy something. There wasn't a gun to their head to pull a trigger the first time they saw a home. You could get in the second time if you wanted to take a look. And just to put this in perspective too, there's like 22,000 realtors in Colorado, and while they're spread throughout the state, the majority are along the Colorado Front Range. So there's at least 12,000 of, my brethren and sisters around this, metro area, this Front Range area, and there's 1,800 homes to sell between all of them. It's just, it's a brutal market, not only for buyers, but for people in the business right now as well.
Keep in mind, there's also 3 million people in the metro area, and there's less than 1,800 homes for any of those people who would like to go somewhere. So kind of a sick joke, but in all reality, this is going to change, right? We know this has to adjust, right? We can't be at this record low inventory levels forever. Now, we may be seeing these type of inventory levels at least through the springtime. Everything that comes on the market right now, probably through the end of the year, is going to be absorbed very quickly. That's why we keep predicting these really high appreciation numbers. But it will definitely take years to dig us out of the inventory hole that we're in, just since we can't really build much either, right? Builders cannot just dump 10,000 homes on the market overnight. All right, so here's a big takeaway for Denver Metro. We're at 0.3 months of inventory. If you're in a balanced market, even more likely what we saw 2019, where it started to feel a little more normal, that was 2 months of inventory. We really should be around 4 months of inventory to be in a balanced market. We're like 10x less than balance. So that 10 times less than balance number has really created the market conditions we're in now, where you're seeing bidding wars and you're just seeing not enough supply for the buyers.
Well, and to really follow on to that, Anthony, I mean, historically, it's 6 months of inventory that we've typically, viewed as a balanced market. Our market in Colorado, because it hasn't been that way since 2010, we feel that even 4 months is kind of that median, where both buyers and sellers are kind of equal in footing, but it's nowhere near there, and it hasn't been there. But man, right now it's just awful.
Yeah, and keep in mind, county by county and city by city and even neighborhood by neighborhood is different on any given area. So when you start to look at some of the micro data and you look at places like Broomfield, Broomfield is doing extremely better than places like Elbert County. And why? I mean, I guess it's all based off of demand, right? But when Broomfield's appreciating even faster than these numbers that we're looking at here, and there's literally less than a week's worth of inventory on the market, they're coming on the market, and they're going off the market as fast as they're coming on. So certain areas are, they have a couple weeks, other places have maybe a day or two. I mean, that's the reality of what we're seeing. So it's very extreme based off the markets. The one big thing, I think this is the big shining light, right? I hate to be negative Nancy about all of these stats because sometimes it feels like this is very negative, but the reality is there's a lot of homes coming on the market. I mean, we had 5,500 homes last month alone come on the market. Yes, that is about 10% less than where we were a year ago, but you're really starting to see that trend up just like a normal spring market. So if you're a buyer and you're hanging out there looking for that, and you're really waiting for inventory to come on the market, there are homes coming on the market, right? They come on every day, they come on all the time at all price ranges, and we're really going to see that continue all the way through the spring and into the summer. So I think that's a good one to kind of look at. This is the one where I don't have a crystal ball, but throughout history, every single year, this is what's happening. And finally, it's taken until 2021 for us to get back on that normal trajectory. So definitely wanted to share that. The other thing is those days on market, we've been talking about buyer demand being an all-time high. All the data is supporting that. And if you look at into some of those submarkets, you're seeing just how extreme that can be, where the average days in the MLS is 11 in Broomfield, it's 14 in Douglas, right? People are still, looks like they're buying out from the city center pretty well. Denver's at 26, but if you really consider that, 26 is really spectacular. So it is definitely competitive to say the least. Jim, you want to talk a little bit by price point? There's a lot going on here at every price point, and we're seeing stuff move across all markets, right? It's pretty amazing.
Well, I think, I think to me, what's the biggest surprise, if I talk to Jim from last year around this time to Jim of this year this time, is just the luxury market more than anything else being as overwhelmingly solid as it is, because at this time last year, we were not even seeing jumbo loans being able to be written. The major banks had completely shut the door on jumbo loans, for a period of time. I think in California, Wells Fargo completely stopped even writing jumbo loans, whereas a lot of other places just simply upped requirements to, absurd amounts, like, needing 12 months of cash in a checking account on hand to, not just funds, but 12 months in a checking account on hand to show, you could afford, these jumbo loans. And so to see, the active listings, be so low, yet the sold, amount, that's to me the biggest surprise, from a year-over-year perspective. And then, I blinked out there for a second. So, the active listings too, and that really the meat and potatoes kind of price ranges, we're looking at 70s to 80% less than we were year-over-year change. And even just the month-over-month change, from February to March, $500,000 to $600,000 is like an average price home in the metro area. And our inventory dropped down 26.5% basically from February to March. And that's the exact opposite of how this market normally works historically, where you have less inventory in January and February, and March is when the spring market starts to kick in and kick up and see an influx in inventory. So we're going in the exact opposite direction of trends, and the same thing with even like, the lower price points, $300,000 to $400,000 to see a 37% drop in inventory month over month. It's tough. That means it's really tough to be a buyer here in this market.
Absolutely. I mean, you go into the month supply of inventory and everything else, and it just gets so much more extreme the lower you go. But keep in mind, even at $3+ million in the ultra luxury market in Denver Metro, we are in an extreme seller's market. So if there was ever a time to sell your ultra high-end luxury home, 2021's the year, right?
Anthony, it was probably like in March of last year before COVID hit that when we pulled up this slide, there was 18 months of inventory for that 3 million plus price point. That wasn't that long ago that there was like, and when we talk, months of inventory, that's if nothing else came on the market, how long would it take to, drain the existing pool of inventory? So to see it go from 18 months to 1.3 in about a year is startling to say the least.
Honestly, I would have never expected to see 1.3 months of inventory at that price point in my lifetime. because that's just something you wouldn't normally see. The luxury market is consistently, overbuilt. It's consistently less demand because there are very few people that can afford those type of price points, especially 3+ million. So yeah, I mean, COVID has brought a lot of money and a lot of people out of the woodwork into Colorado for sure. All right, one last shameless self-promotion before we bring you into the submarkets from Fort Collins all the way down to Colorado Springs. I am Anthony with Land Title, and my cell phone number is 303-968-9868. You can reach me there anytime.
Jim Merrion here with Coldwell Banker in Colorado, 303-548-0243 or jim@ourcoloradohomes.com.
All right, so what's going on in Larimer County, Jim?
Well, Larimer, we got less listings than normal. Imagine that. 26.7% for the single family. It's a drop from the previous year. The one thing I think it's important to remember too, Anthony, just when we're talking all this inventory year over year, there was a good amount of listings that pulled themselves off the market as soon as the shutdown occurred, just out of sellers being concerned about strangers being in their home. So to see, a 26.7% drop in new listings over the previous year really hides the fact that there's even probably a bigger drop, because a lot of these homes were, at some point last year yanked off the market as well. So there's a pretty substantial drop in new listing inventory. But again, like to see the sold listings go up 10%, in March from March of last year, and to see the year to date being up 13.6%. Of course, it's going to translate then to a median sale price increasing a remarkable 12 to 14%, in price. So, and then we're seeing, of course, the median sale price in the townhomes and condos also rise substantially. They're going up 12% median sale price increase just year to date. So it does not pay to wait in this market when you're seeing, prices rise 12% from the beginning of the year to today.
Yeah, those year-to-date numbers are just incredible. I think if we go over to Weld County, you're going to see much of the same stuff. Pretty much everything Jim said for Larimer County, we're experiencing the Weld County markets. We're down 60-some% in inventory. If you look at it from a month supply perspective, if you look at it year to date, which is, I'd almost kind of prefer to look at things year to date, because what people forget is, the first quarter last year was actually a pretty good quarter, right? It was better than it was in 2019. And then COVID kind of shut things down about halfway through March. So when you're looking at it year to date to current, I think that really tells us 2020 versus 2021, we're getting a much more, more consistent view of what's changing, what's happening. And we are looking at those numbers still at 13% increase in average sales prices and attached. The townhouse condo market is completely caught up in all of these marketplaces, and it's trending very similarly. We're at 7% increase in average sales price in townhouse condos in Weld, which, keep in mind, there are not very many townhouse condos in Weld County, right? They represent 10% of the market, where in Metro, they represent somewhere between 30 and 40% of the market. So everything is kind of trending in that same direction across most of the Front Range, regardless of Weld County, Larimer County. We'll get down to El Paso in a second and kind of give you a good key on all the way down to there, because it's pretty extreme changes in Colorado as we've been looking, but certain markets are definitely going faster than others. So when you look at somewhere like Boulder County, it's a great example. The percentage changes might not be that different. We're looking at a very similar chart to what we saw in the Denver metro area here. If we're looking at the year-to-date numbers, our solds are down 8% in Boulder County, and that's really restricted to just the amount of supply on the market, right? There's just not enough homes for sale, and so Boulder County is experiencing that kind of a change. Now,
well, Anthony, just let's flip back to that slide for a second, because you misspoke a little. Our active inventory is down 8%, but our sold month over month from February to March is up almost 36% in this year. So, I mean, that, let's avoid, again, I think that year over year, because it's so polluted with the COVID shutdown, but just to see that our sold percent increased 36% from February to March, that's a massive leap. We typically never kind of see that kind of jump from month to month. So
we did, for sure. What I was really trying to speak about is just the fact that how limited the supply line is here in Boulder County, and why that's really creating, right? The fact that our supply is that low, and year to date we're up 3% or 2.5% in our under contract numbers, because we just keep pushing things faster. And it's just pretty amazing how much that shift is taking place. Now, just like Jim was saying, the luxury market in Boulder County is very similar to Metro, where we were at 30 months of inventory at 3+ million shortly around this time last year, right? I mean, it was so extreme that when we're down to 7.5 months of inventory at $3+ million, because there are a lot of $3+ million homes in Boulder County, you can really just see the demand rushing in to Boulder County to live here. And just like in the metro area, you're really seeing at 400, 500, 600,000, we're talking about a week's worth of inventory on the market, right? There's just not very much, and they're moving very, very quickly.
And again, if you look at that, column, that's the month over month changes of inventory on that list. Again, we're going from February to March, which is usually an increase, in inventory. Some years has been like a 40% increase. And here we're seeing, again, a negative decline in the 10, percentile, 15, 20, even 30 percentile for the 400 to 499. That's remarkable to see such a drop.
Yeah, it is. And just like you'd said, in Denver, we're seeing a lot of the same trajectories where luxury is booming, right? I mean, if you look at over 1 million represents the majority of our market that we have inventory for right now, which is pretty crazy. There's just not enough on the market in those median and average sales prices. So there's a lot going on up there because that's about all that's for sale. Now, we do see stuff come on in the market under 800,000, right? We see a lot of it come on the market, and it's just moving every single week. I mean, that's basically what we're seeing here. You look at that 500,000 to 600,000 range. It's a very good example where you have 22 active homes that were on the market at the end of April or the end of March, and there were 51 total sales. So those homes are just selling as fast as they come on the market. Now, we can't really compare those year over year numbers, but when you look at those month over month numbers, and there's a shift like the sales are down 32%. Well, the sales are down 32% because the active inventory levels are down 80% from where they were a year ago, year to date. So this huge supply restriction has created just a frenzy, and it's creating those average sales prices to go up through the roof.
Yeah, let's move down to the south now a little bit, Anthony. Our friends in El Paso County, home of Colorado Springs, which, again, has always been, essentially the winner the last few years for the median sale price increase. And, it's always kind of between Larimer and El Paso always seems to do a little bit better. And I think here is another example of that. Median sale price is about a point higher than it was in Larimer, about 15.3% year-to-date change. So the average single-family home went from 350-ish to about 402 down there. And, considering the fact there's like 9 military bases around Colorado Springs or something like that, it's a very much price-conscious market typically, and it's always been the value add for the whole area. But our median sale price has just traveled leaps and bounds higher over the last 3 years in the Colorado Springs area. And then even the townhome market, just blown away by the fact that it has year to date a 21% increase in townhome and condo prices. That's remarkable to see for 3 months of activity, essentially. To see it go up 7% each month. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, what really gives us the telltale sign here is that leaps and bounds higher than everywhere else we've looked at. 103% listed sale price. That is 100% fueled by that month supply of inventory being at 0.4 or 0.5 months of inventory. When you just have no inventory, people get desperate and they're willing to pay a lot of money. And what that does is drive that appreciation up fast as possible, right? Because we're definitely seeing some neighborhoods and things like that appreciate this quickly in our area here in Boulder County or in Metro, but an entire city of 300,000 to 500,000 people, it's pretty incredible, right?
Well, this is where it's really important, if you're a buyer in this market, to be asking your agent to generate a hot sheet report for you, or if you're a realtor, to start doing this as well, because you really need to understand these hot sheets reports, which show what the list price and sale price was, and then the delta between. It really is important on a micro level to look at a neighborhood, look at a zip code to see what that price over asking is, because if you just look in the general at 102% over asking price, that's a general thing. But once you get down into the weeds, you can see it be 106, 108% of asking price in particular neighborhoods. So really important to pay attention to the data on a micro level as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Anthony Meisner with Land Title. Really appreciate you coming out to stick in with us for March of 2021. Here we are getting into the bulk of our spring buying season, and the most extreme is still yet to come. You can reach out to me on my cell phone, 303-968-9868, or at my email at ameisner@ltgc.com.
And I'm Jim Merrion, realtor here at Coldwell Banker. Give me a holler at 303 548-0243, or feel free to shoot me an email to jim@ourcoloradohomes.com. Thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it.
See you next time.